Welcome to In the Funnel. My name is Mark Cox. In the Funnel is a group of sales coaches and consultants that help B2B sales teams dramatically improve revenue. Clients come to us when revenue growth is stagnated, or their sales team is not meeting expectations, or they need to recalibrate their sales and go-to-market plan for the upcoming year. Our clients have enjoyed tremendous success working within the funnel, and please hear it straight from them by listening to the testimonial section of this website. What they'll tell you is there's two things that make us unique and different in our space. Number one, we have a process and a methodology. First, for understanding your current state, and then second, for building your sales and go-to-market plan for the upcoming year. The second thing that makes us unique and different is that everybody within the funnel has run a material sales organization in their recent past. We're all practitioners. We don't have any theorists or teachers, and what that means is we can get in front of your sales team and run the next sales meeting, or join them on their next sales call to close your next large prospect. All of us have a passion for professional, disciplined, process-driven sales, and we'd be delighted to talk to you if you're looking to grow revenue for your company. Please feel free to reach out to us through this website at info@inthefunnel.com or by telephone. Thanks for taking the time to watch this.
If we tell positive stories and we have a positive memory, we actually relive that emotional state as though it was happening. So if you want to eliminate a lot of your negative emotions, reliving them, feeding them beyond that 90 seconds is a really powerful thing to be aware of. But equally, if you want to be in a more positive state, reliving positive emotional states and telling positive stories feeds those positive emotions and enables you to live within them outside of that 90 seconds. So be aware of this as you go about your work. You know, what are the emotions that I'm feeding? Are they the negative things from the day that I'm continuing to feed and my mind can't discern the difference? Or is it the positive things where I get to relive them again and actually extend those positive emotions out?
Folks, we've got a really important show today and just a great one. And we've got Monique Rhodes, and she's a happiness strategist. She's spent the last 25 years studying the mind and its relationship to happiness and suffering. There's actually over 70 universities and colleges that use her program, the 10-Minute Mind. She's also got an 8-week course, the Happiness Baseline. And in it, she actually scientifically baselines 8 areas that are really important for happiness. And they include things like gratitude, self-compassion, work with the mind, the words you use, social connection, how you relate to technology, generosity, and true contentment. It's such an interesting and important conversation today because, you know, how we actively manage our own happiness or control it. Is it a decision? Maybe it's a habit. Monique's going to help us with all of that. She's an amazingly interesting person who's done some wild things, including touring as an opening act for Chuck Berry across Europe for a couple of years. She's a professional musician as well and a singer-songwriter. Our chat today went super quick. It's always a great sign that it's just a fantastic conversation. I really enjoyed meeting Monique. I'm sure you will too. And if you do, please like and subscribe to the Selling Well podcast. Tell your friends. Here's Monique Rhodes. Monique, thank you so much for joining the show. It's such a pleasure to meet you.
I'm so happy to be here, Mark. Thank you for having me. It's a true honor to be on your podcast.
Oh, well, thank you for that. And I was so excited to speak to you today, Monique, because this is such an important topic, not just in professional sales, but in life. Mindset, happiness, you know, it's my belief that it's everything. But But before we get into that, you have got one of the most amazing CVs I've ever seen and most interesting. Give us a little bit of the story of what brought you to this point today, Monique. Tell us a little bit about your journey.
Sure. Well, I'll make it brief because it's a very big, delicious life, and I don't want to take you on too much of a run. But, I think a lot of us grow up in situations that are difficult, and I was no exception. I was adopted at 10 days old and brought into a family where it's probably fair to say that my mother suffers from mental illness. And it was very difficult. I struggled a lot in my childhood. And I think probably, Mark, by the time I was in my teenage years, I was suffering from depression.
Right.
And of course, we now look at depression, anxiety, and stress as something that so many people are challenged with. And by the age of 19, things really had a very difficult point for me. And there were a lot of circumstances that came together, and I wasn't able to regulate my emotions, and I was just kind of hopeless. And I ended up in hospital having tried to take my own life.
Oh, no.
And I remember, Mark, when I was in hospital, just really asking myself a very pivotal question. Why was it that I struggled so much? Why me? It didn't really seem fair. And why did I struggle to be happy consistently? And what I decided to do was to see whether I could figure out the answer to this question, and to see whether it was something that I needed to accept about myself and my life, or was it something that I could change? And this led me on a journey all over the world. In fact, for 13 years, I lived out of a bag, and I traveled all over the world. I did wild and crazy things. I rode a motorcycle through India for 4 years. I've been to places like Bhutan, and, just really looked at the different ways that people were living. I looked at different philosophies. I looked at myself, and I used myself as an experiment to see if I could shift my happiness levels. And I'm thrilled to say that I was very, very successful in doing it. And kind of this is how I sort of accidentally ended up teaching this. But this is now what I teach, and I teach thousands and thousands of students from all over the world very, very successfully how to be happier.
Well, boy, I think it's first of all, thank you for sharing that story, and the intimacy and the vulnerability of that story. And I think this topic of happiness, Monique, is just so incredibly important today. As many of you listening to the podcast probably know, those of us who have chosen life in professional sales, although we haven't really kind of investigated this topic on the selling well, there are some stats that say we may have a higher than average percentage of mental health issues than the average public, or the typical average. And the same in terms of addiction, as potentially as a result of the first one. And a number of other excellent podcasts have really pursued those topics. I think the same pertains actually at times to entrepreneurs. And, a lot of salespeople see themselves that way. But let's talk about that, Monique. And again, sometimes it minimizes the importance of the topic when we're trying to squeeze it into a 20-minute podcast or a 30-minute podcast. But when we realize that all we're trying to do is help people with this podcast in 20 or 30 minutes, maybe give them something that they can grab and use to help them in their lives and their profession. What did you learn from that journey? How do we use our mind to help improve our happiness? What is that approach?
Yeah. I want to say something, Mark, about that statistic that you give, that people in sales, might have a higher tendency to suffer from challenges with their mental health. And I know that there's the obvious reasons that we can see of the pressure.
Right.
But I think there's something else that could also be an element in there. And that is that when you're working in sales, you have to be very sensitive to other people. You have to be able to read their body language. You have to be able to read their tonality. You have to be able to read behind the lines as to taking them down a process to show them what it is that it is going to be a good fit for them. And I suspect with those levels of sensitivity, we may find that there are more mental health challenges, because with that sensitivity, with that deep empathy, often we don't know how to take care of ourselves as well. Whereas perhaps if you were working in a profession of, let's say you worked in IT, you wouldn't be coming up as much around that need to be deeply sensitive. So I think that that's something that is worth thinking about for those of you listening who are in this field, that with that, there's a real need to take extra care of yourself. There's a real need to be aware of, what is it that I'm putting into my mind? Because you are naturally already sensitive. Do I get myself caught in news cycles that aren't good for me? When I go onto social media, how do I feel after half an hour of being on social media?
Right.
And to start to bring an awareness in of consciously looking at what feels good and what doesn't. Because more than likely, you're a naturally charismatic person and a naturally magnetic type of person. And so, as well as being magnetic, we often end up being those kind of people that are easily sold to as well, because we have that passion, right? And so we have a tendency to fall down holes of being sucked into being sucked in empathetically in ways that other people won't. So let's say you watch the news, as a lot of people do. You might start to think, well, maybe watching the news isn't so good for me. So it's bringing that consciousness in with an understanding that as a selling professional, you have almost like a thinner skin. And that makes you so good at your job, but it also has a shadow side, which means that you have to be even more alert to taking care of your mind in a way that maybe other people don't need to be. Does that make sense, Mark?
Wow, it makes sense when you explain it, Monique. It's actually, and it's such an interesting perspective on it. Because I think many people, certainly with the 30 or 40-year-old stereotype of a salesperson, would think that, a salesperson has extra thick skin because they can take no's and rejection quite frequently, and so on and so on and so forth. But I think you're absolutely right today. Today, it's much different, where you're actually, it's not pitching, it's kind of helping somebody achieve a better outcome for themselves, personally or professionally. That's really what selling is, getting them to a better place. And while you're doing it, you're trying to assess what's going on. So you do end up being highly attuned and highly empathetic. And I how interesting that would make us more sensitive to all the other inputs in the world. I think there may also be something in sales where at the end of the day, I don't fully control that outcome. So I may control my activities, but I don't control the outcome. Whereas somebody in IT controls their activities, which is the outcome. And so that lack of control, I think, can cause a couple of things in terms of stress and challenge and everything else. But tell us a little more about the, I like this path of taking in the empathy in terms of maintaining or protecting your mental health. I absolutely experience what you've talked about. If I spend a long time on social media or LinkedIn even, at the end of it, I feel, it feels like I've wasted time and I feel highly unsatisfied.
Yes, it's so true.
It's a physical feeling. It's absolutely recognizable and tangible. I have come across people recently in the last couple of years thought leaders, smart people who have decided to avoid all forms of news. And so in this world, in this day and age where news has become an opinion, probably not a bad idea in terms of maintaining a mental state and their own happiness. What are some other things we can think about in terms of trying to, let's say, protect our mindset?
So I think that it's really important to understand that on a lot of levels, we're being manipulated by large companies who are making so much money out of getting our attention. Mm-hmm. So I remember when I was young, the news cycle, certainly growing up in New Zealand, appeared more to be about informing, whereas now the news cycle is a sales process. Yeah. And as salespeople, we should be able to see through this a lot quicker. It's a sales process to make money for the investors, as is social media. So to have that awareness that we are actually the product is a good awareness to bring. And as salespeople, that correlation should be one that we can make quickly. Like we have a little bit of an epiphany around that. I think it's important to, sometimes people do a food diary, Mark, where they will sit and they will, take note of what it is that I've eaten during the day. And 20 minutes later, how do I feel? Right. I think it's really good to do an activity diary in a similar way, is to have a look and see, literally as an experiment, okay, so I sat on social media for half an hour. How do I feel? And you might rate it between 1 and 10. Okay, the next thing, I went for a walk in nature for half an hour. How do I feel? So that instead of allowing cultural norms to dictate what we do with our lives, to actually start to be able to bring conscious decisions into it and start to see what makes me feel good. It doesn't mean that you'll do them, but you'll start to see a correlation. It's like I might go to a party and I know that I'm going to feel really well if I eat that beautiful salad there, but if there's a big chocolate cake, I still might go for it, right?
Right.
Because this is where we begin to understand that it's actually habitual behavior that's dictating what we do. There was a study done some years ago. I think it was in the University of Charleston. They put rats into a maze, and the rats go into the maze. And if the rats came out on the right-hand side, there was a bowl of water. If they came out on the left-hand side, there was a bowl of chocolate milk. So the rats learned very, very quickly to come out on the side of the chocolate milk. Then what the scientists did was they put a little bit of, was actually a little bit of poison in the chocolate milk. And they wanted to see what the rats would do. And their hypothesis would be that the rats would reject the chocolate milk and start going back to the water. But Mark, they were really shocked to discover that the rats kept drinking the chocolate milk despite the fact that it was making them sick. And this is what we do. We keep going down paths of habitual behavior where our habits are stronger than what we know is good for us. So it's really good for us to understand this about ourselves and realize that we have to work with our habits, because we think that we're making a bunch of choices, but actually we're just habitual creatures. We wake up in the morning, we do the same things over and over and over again. We're not really choosing. We're just habitually doing things, and to become conscious of those habits. So when we sit down and we think to ourselves, oh, I'm just going to jump on social media for 5 minutes. Okay, I know that my habit is that I won't stay on here for 5 minutes. So maybe I need to set up habit breakers for myself. And on social media, one of the things that we can do is we can set limits. I'm going to get on Facebook and I'm going to have a limit that I consciously need to overcome if I'm going to go long for, say, 15 minutes. So I have it set up on my iPad, which is the only place I look at social media, that I do 15 minutes a day on social media.
Good for you.
If I want to bypass that, I have to make a conscious choice. So at the 10-minute mark, my social media says to me, you've been on for 10 minutes. And at the 15-minute mark, it shuts me down. I can bypass it, but I have to make a choice around it. And suddenly I start thinking, wait a second, what am I doing? This is not going to make me feel good. And I don't want to waste hours sitting on social media because it doesn't feel so good. What else could I do with my time and energy that will actually make me feel nourished rather than that dissatisfaction, which is the same feeling when I'm at a party and there's a big piece of chocolate cake? Feels good for a moment, but afterwards I feel dissatisfied. Because we just want to be happier, Mark, at the end of the day. But cultural norms and advertising lead us to believe these things are going to make you feel good because they're literally set up to be so deeply addictive.
How interesting. They're set up to make you feel better. And you talked about large corporations, Monique, actually kind of manipulating. Probably the most famous marketing book ever is something called Influence by a guy named Robert Cialdini. That's probably the #1 most popular marketing book ever in 1980. He set the standard for these concepts that direct or influence behavior. And he originally wrote the book to teach all of us how we were being manipulated by large corporations. And what happened from the book was the large corporations engaged him, because he was such an expert, to help them leverage those traits to manipulate people even more. So he actually has become one of the top marketing gurus in the world because large corporations applied it, because they work. So I always find that kind of funny. It was supposed to start it as kind of a self-help guide to say, be careful, these things are happening to you. And the corporations got smart and said, hey, let's use them even more. If we are in this situation, though, one of the things you're talking about there is being intentional, thinking about those habits. We're all habit driven. The difference is we just have good habits or bad habits, or helpful or hurtful habits. Doesn't surprise me at all that the rats drank the chocolate milk. We're doing worse than that to ourselves all the time, whether it's stress, diet, lack of exercise, lack of sleep. We all do the same things to ourselves now. So there's always those areas we can maybe improve on. But I think we do have many habits that are helpful, for mental health and happiness. And you come across those people that seem to be just blissfully happy. But to me, it's always intentional. Those people are quite intentional about it. You are one of those people, by the way. In the 5-minute introduction we have, it's actually, your happiness is contagious. You're the vibe you're sending over. What do you think the things are that make people truly happy?
It's interesting because Brene Brown has done a lot of research around this. I can't remember the term she uses around, she doesn't use happiness, but she uses some particular terms. And there are certain things that she has come across that I think it's really worth looking at, like things like people who have some kind of spiritual or religious practice, which is an interesting one. People who know how to play is another one. What I've found through my work is that there are probably 8 areas that I particularly work with that I feel create the biggest impact. And the first one that I always look at, I have a course called the Happiness Baseline, and I take people through 8 weeks of looking at themselves, 8 weeks of looking at these habits, so we can start to see what it is that we can shift, that we can, really move your happiness levels. And In those 8 weeks, we look at 8 different areas. So the first one is we look at gratitude practices. Once you start working with gratitude practices effectively, we start to shift your happiness levels within the first week. We look at things like self-compassion, which most people don't even know what it is or how to work with it. But it's learning how to be kinder to ourselves, which is huge in working with our happiness levels. We look at working with the mind, so that we absolutely look at a meditation practice. I believe a meditation practice is fundamental. And we look at how can we have a meditation practice that's quick and easy and effective. We look at the words that we use. So often, when we look at someone who's struggling with their happiness levels, I see that the words that they're using in their life are very victim-based or negative, and how we live in a world that is so designed, particularly with social media, to say outrageous things that are negative as a way. It's encouraged in social media. It's a way that drives that engine of social media. I look at social connection. If I've got anyone who comes to me suffering from depression, which so many people do, one of the first things that we do is we look at their social circles, their social connections, but not only that, the micro connections that happen during the day. Going to the store and seeing someone just briefly and having those little micro connections is so powerful. We look at their relationship with technology. We look at, and not at all saying, I'm going to stop you from having a relationship with technology, but that we have a mature and a healthier relationship with it, where you are more in control of your relationship rather than big tech being in control. We look at generosity as another way. We often have this belief mark that the more that I take care of myself, the happier I'll be. But actually, it's the more I take care of myself and other people, the happier I am. And also looking at what true contentment is. Like, what does contentment mean for me? And all of this is scientifically based. It works. And when we look at these 8 areas, what we find is within 8 weeks, I can promise you, every single person who's completed the course has shifted their happiness levels. We test people with the Penn State University happiness inventory at the beginning and at the end of the course. And I'm so proud to say that I have a 100% success rate in shifting people's happiness levels. And usually we get a big shift even in the first week. So it's really exciting to start to understand that we see, I'm kind of stuck and I'm caught and I'm having difficulties. But actually, we're able to shift ourselves by working with our mind relatively quickly and by shifting some of the habits that we have, which is why I find this work so exciting. You don't have to wait a year. You don't need to spend thousands of dollars on therapy. We can actually make these shifts relatively quickly if we know what we're wanting to shift.
This is absolute gold. And folks listening, I mean, all of us want to be moving in this direction further and further each and every day. We just want to make progress. And frankly, I will share that at certain times in my life, particularly professionally, when things may have been more difficult, some of these things I kind of tripped into or defaulted to just to maintain perspective and context. So whether it was gratitude, which to this day I keep a gratitude journal. It'd be rude, but I could just grab it right from my bookshelf off camera here. And I am amazed at how good I feel every day after jotting down 5 or 6 things that I'm enormously happy for. And whatever challenge is coming to get me today, tomorrow, the next day, it just puts it in perspective, because the things I'm grateful for will last for a lifetime, hopefully. And the things that are going to challenge me, I won't even remember in 3 years.
Exactly.
And so it puts it in a little bit of context where it's not that big a deal. And then suddenly when you have that perspective, little things in a given day like traffic don't really bother you that much.
I have a strategy, Mark, where I ask myself a question. When something's really bothering me, I say to myself, will this matter in 6 hours? Will it matter in 6 days? Will it matter in 6 weeks? Will it matter in 6 months? If it's going to matter in 6 months, I need to pay attention. If it's going to matter less than 6 months, I know I can just let it go as quickly as possible. This is another interesting thing where we don't really understand the cycle of our emotions. There's some amazing work that was done by Jill Bolt Taylor, who did that fantastic TED talk called The Stroke of Insight. And she's a neuroscientist, as you know. And she discovered that an emotion has a shelf life of 90 seconds. So one of the important things that we need to understand is that after 90 seconds, if we're still having an emotional reaction, it's because we're feeding that emotion. So if we think of an example, like let's say you go to a sales call, right? And you're with someone and you walk out of that sales call and maybe it didn't go so well and you have anxiety or maybe you have frustration or anger even. If you can understand that that feeling is lasting for 90 seconds, then you might be very careful about what you do afterwards, okay? Because what we have a tendency to do, Mark, is this. We walk out of a sales call, we're feeling, let's say it's this feeling of frustration. And then we call someone. You wouldn't believe what just happened.
Right.
I had this guy, he was such an asshole and it was so problematic. And then the other person solidifies it more. Yeah, God, I can't believe it. They might even tell a story where they're dredging up a situation that happened to them with someone similar last week. Then we finish that call, we go home, we speak to our partner or whoever our significant other is or whoever we live with, and we say, God, you wouldn't believe what happened today. Now, there's an interesting thing about the mind, Mark, and that is when we bring those memories up, the mind isn't able to discern the difference between the memory and something happening in that moment, right? Right. So every time we tell this story, this particular negative story, we are not able to stop the emotional reaction from happening in the exact same way as if the situation was happening in real life. Now, this is an amazing thing to understand because there's a double-edged sword to this. It also means equally, Mark, that if we tell positive stories and we have a positive memory, we actually relive that emotional state as though it was happening. So if you want to eliminate a lot of your negative emotions, reliving them, feeding them beyond that 90 seconds is a really powerful thing to be aware of. But equally, if you want to be in a more positive state, reliving positive emotional states and telling positive stories feeds those positive emotions and enables you to live within them outside of that 90 seconds. So be aware of this as you go about your work. You know, what are the emotions that I'm feeding? Are they the negative things from the day that I'm continuing to feed and my mind can't discern the difference? Or is it the positive things where I get to relive them again and actually extend those positive emotions out?
Thank you for that. That is, I personally have experienced it many a time. And I can, when I'm doing it, I feel myself I just had never thought through it this way. I get just as angry or just as happy. And so, you know, why wouldn't we just diminish those negative things, put them away, never live them again, and just go to the positive? Because really it's about the next thing. We have no time machine to fix anything in the past. We can just influence the future. And so I really like this. By the way, this analogy, I know on your bio, you talk a lot about sport. this analogy is highly, highly important in the sport that I love and the position I play, which is hockey and goalie. And
Right.
the best coaches I ever had said, listen, the law of averages said something awful is going to go behind you once in a while. You need a short memory, because if
Yes.
you get all angry about it, it's going to ruin the most important shot is the next shot. So whatever went in, it's over. Short memory, just put yourself in the right state. The other thing, I love these. I love the 8 gratitude, self-compassion. Folks, I don't know if there's anybody on there but who feels this way, but I probably am not overly compassionate to myself. I can speak from personal experience. I'm not really that bothered when the world makes mistakes. I'm rather highly bothered when I make mistakes. I think it comes from spending so much time playing that darn sport, where you get no margin of error if you're a goalie. And so I have struggled with this every once in a while, for sure, Monique, where I'll do something and maybe it didn't go so well. I had a conversation with someone that didn't go well maybe a month ago, and it was a Friday. And I remember thinking on the Saturday, I was still thinking about it. We're with friends on a beautiful day at a lovely, lovely venue. And I'm literally in my mind saying, you have to let this go. You're human. Don't ruin today. You know, it's over. You'll be better next time. You've learned from it. But it's a learned skill, I think, to be able to do that consistently.
It's a habit, Mark. There you go. Right? There we go again. Where do I habitually go? And I know for myself, the habit that I've honed is that when something difficult happens, I don't deny my emotions. I feel them. And then I make a choice. Am I going to keep living this particular emotional state? And so my habit is not to. You know, often people will ask me about maybe something's difficult happened, and I refuse to talk about it. I have no interest in talking about it. It's not going to help me unless I'm sitting down with someone and workshopping what can I learn from this? How could I have done this differently? Then a conversation is warranted. But if I'm literally just having a conversation to live in this role of victimhood, I'm absolutely wasting my time and setting myself up for problems. So it's habitual behavior. What do I do habitually? And that's where it's powerful for us to understand that, you know, happiness is a habit. It truly is.
And is it fair to say too, Monique, happiness is a decision you make?
Absolutely. But it is a decision we make habitually. That's what it is. And it's a decision we make around our habits. The more conscious we can become of our habits, the more we have the ability to make decisions around them. Therefore, the more ability that we have to have an impact on our happiness, because a lot of the time we don't realize we are living unconsciously. So bringing our consciousness in to our habitual behavior is the most important thing that we can do, so we can make those decisions around our habits.
Oh, spectacular. So folks, I want to run through those again. Now, everything that Monique has actually referenced is going to be in the show notes for today. The links that we've talked about, we're going to summarize the eight areas of happiness: gratitude, self-compassion, work with your mind. The words we use. It feels like all of these are directed entirely at me, by the way. Social connection, relationship with technology, generosity, and then true contentment. So all of these things, you know, these are just fantastic things to contemplate for us. But Monique, tell us a little bit about the 10-minute mind.
Well, the 10-minute mind is a course that was my starting point, where I began teaching meditation, but just purely by chance. I was in India, and I was living in India. I was actually doing a project, a music project for the Dalai Lama. And I was living in India, and these two girls came to me and they said, listen, we know that you meditate on that rooftop every morning. Would you teach us? And I said, absolutely not, because I had no desire to teach anybody meditation, and I had no idea how to teach anybody meditation. And they came back to me 3 days in a row asking me. And I finally gave in because I felt guilty, and they came the next day, 8 o'clock the next morning. And I taught what I believed at that moment was the singular most worst meditation class that anyone ever taught. And they came back the next day with two of their friends. And I was like, what are you doing? And they said, we want you to keep teaching us. And before I knew it, I had 50 people on my rooftop every morning that I was teaching. And instead of trying to teach them, one of the first things that I did was I talked to them about why meditation was my superpower, why it had changed my life. And I think one of the most important things that we need to understand as to why meditation is so powerful, and what I teach in the 10-minute mind, and we also teach it in the happiness baseline, is that we spend most of our lives being reactive. We're not conscious. We're running away from ourselves and our emotional states. And if we can take just 10 minutes a day to get to know our mind, to get to know ourself, and to start to sit with the wonderful emotions and the uncomfortable emotions and learn just to stay, it means that when we go into the sales call and we're freaking out and the person's not acting the way we want them to, we can just settle ourselves. We can calm ourselves. We can manage it instead of running off into panic. When someone says something that we're not sure about or we're thrown by, we can have that little bit of a gap. Instead of reacting habitually, we can start to make exactly what you and I have been talking about, a conscious decision to be able to respond. And I think as salespeople, I think meditation is a really powerful tool to have, because what we have a tendency to do is let our mind run very, very quickly. We need the mind to run quickly as a salesperson in order to be able to give the person what they need to lead them into whatever's going to be good for them. But at the same time, we need to slow our mind down so that we're able to give them the answers that will be of the most benefit. And so that's why I think for salespeople, I think meditation is a really, really powerful skill. And I encourage all of you to learn. You come and learn with me or learn with someone, but learn it, because it will be a real bonus for you as you're learning basically to sell well.
Oh, fantastic. Team, I can say on my end, I do meditate every morning. So one of the decisions I made maybe 10 years ago was I wanted to make sure a couple things happened every day. I wanted to enjoy every day. So after years of spent waking up in the middle of the night, jumping on planes to different places all week, I decided I actually wanted to wake up every day and enjoy everything around me for at least an hour. But I'm a learner. So I have to get up and I read, and I do something else I love, which is drink black coffee. And I'm so happy there's a fire going and I'm learning, and I read, and then I meditate. And I try and, lots of different types, and I'm no pro at meditation. I haven't gone through transcendental meditation training. I literally use the Peloton app now. And they have some great meditations that I listen to. Now I'm going to be listening, of course, to Monique's and jumping into the 10-minute mind program. But I just try and set my intention for the day, and then I write down what I want to accomplish in the day. I also write down what I'm happy about, just on the same, kind of graph paper and my colored markers. And then I can go about my day. And I do one other thing. I actually bring my wife a cup of coffee every morning because I get up very early. But that way I've done one thing for my wife before I leave. I want to do that before I go and give everything else to the rest of the universe. And over time, that's become a habit. And I'll say, Monique, every once in a while, I might be traveling or something's going to happen, and I'll feel in the middle of the day, I just don't feel quite right. and I'll remember I forgot to meditate. I'll think
Mm.
back and go, you know what? I actually forgot to meditate today. So there's so much wisdom here. This is the true joy of running this podcast, Monique, is meeting people like you and
Thank you.
learning from people like you. So thank you for joining today.
And thank you for having me, Mark.
The folks listening are going to want to learn more. What's the best way to learn more about you or the 10-minute mind or the happiness baseline? Where do they go to learn about that?
I think the easiest place is we have a website called How Happy Am I? Come in, there's a quiz there so you can see what are my happiness levels like? Where am I at? And I really encourage you to come in there. I also podcast every day. My podcast is called In Your Right Mind. I podcast every single day like a lunatic, but I love it. I really enjoy, answering questions from my students or thinking about whatever's going on. So you can listen to that, or come to howhappyami.com and take that quiz, and let's just have a gentle look at where you're at.
Fantastic and lovely. By the way, a gentle look at where you're at. If that's not inviting, folks, I don't know what else is. I will say I did get a chance to listen to a number of the podcasts, Monique's podcasts, In Your Right Mind, and they're very, very entertaining, informative, and frankly easy to get started because they're short. So 10 minutes, 15 minutes, you can get into these. And I found myself listening to 3, 4, or 5 in a row because they're so good. You just keep playing different ones and different ones. Monique, I hope that our paths cross again face to face when we're both on the same continent at some point in time.
Come down to Costa Rica. That's where I'm living, Mark.
Wow. Actually, that's not outside the realm of possibility.
Come and see me. I would love it.
Thank you again, Monique. We'll be in touch again. And folks, thank you so much for listening to today's podcast. We do this because our mission is to improve the performance and professionalism of B2B sales, and we want to improve the lives of salespeople. We also know we're not perfect at podcasts, so your feedback's really important to us. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please like and subscribe to The Selling Well and tell your friends. But if there's something we can be doing differently, please tell me. We want to hear it. We love constructive criticism. My email is markcox@inthefunnel.com, and I actually check that email. Send us your thoughts. You've already sent some great ones, and we'll see you next time on The Selling Well.